Vengevine is a broken magic card. Well, every card in this deck is broken, and if you're wondering why, it's because of Bazaar of Baghdad. This card is actually broken. Being a land that lets you draw 2 cards and discard 3 for free means that we can have extremely explosive turns as soon as turn 1 with Vengevine and Hollow One. To support these key cards, the rest of the deck is filled up with value cards to discard, like Madness Root Wallas to have cheap creatures for the Vengevine trigger, and classic graveyard cards like Bloodghast, and some cards that, you can't name around some FNM warriors. You might be wondering why we play Gaia's Cradle in the list. Well, we have it because not only does it make a lot of mana to sink into our creatures, but it also counters the most popular cyber card for this deck, Tabernacle. This deck is so explosive and we get a lot of turn 1 degeneracy throughout the video, so you want to watch until the end, and as always, if you enjoy the quality of this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. To start the first round of this video, we're on the play, but we have to use Serum Powder for our opening hand. For those who don't know what Serum Powder does, it has this weird rule where it basically gives us a free mulligan if we exile our whole hand. The reason why we play 4 copies is this deck has to mulligan to Bazaar of Baghdad as it's the key card of the deck, which is why we go down to 6 cards here. So we only have to bottom 1 card, that's going to be the Gaia's Cradle, and that's a big thanks to the Serum Powder for not damaging our hand too much. The game starts off, we activate Bazaar, we don't find anything else to value discard, so let's just put this Root Wallet into play and have access to Bloodghast and Hogak down the line. Now in Vintage, relying on a land to win the game can easily be blown out by things like Wasteland, which is what the opponent does on their first turn. Top decking a Serum Powder is not what we want to see, so we just gotta play our land, play our Deathrite Shaman and get the Bloodghast back, attack in for 1, and hope that it's enough. If you thought Vengevine was powerful in Modern, wait till you see the power level of it in Vintage. Our opponent casts Vengevine and passes back the turn. We top deck Once Upon a Time, which is a really nice spell here. While we can't cast it for free, what we can do is use Deathrite Shaman to exile a land from the opponent's graveyard, use the Besagio alongside it to cast the Once Upon a Time, and dig for another Bazaar. Now we kind of whiff, but Hexdrinker is a really nice card here as it's something that will let us sink all of our extra mana every turn into, and also get protection from instants, which can hopefully be enough because we're trying to mana screw the opponent now. As we left back a blocker, the opponent just plays an island and says go. We top deck a Once Upon a Time, which we can cast here, but don't forget we have Hogak in the graveyard, and I'd rather cast that to bait out a counterspell, because then we can just recast the Hogak down the line when we cast more things. So what I'm going to do is cast the Hexdrinker, it resolves, and now we can delve out the Hogak. To no one's surprise, the blue deck has the Force of Will, so we gotta ship it back. As we've got no blockers, the opponent attacks in with Vengevine and actually hits a Root Walla which they cast, and we top deck a Collector Roof. That's a really good card here as it turns off the Vengevine treasures as they are artifacts, and now we can attack in with the Bloodghast, say go, and present a lot of blockers, also mana screwing them at the same time. From here, the problem with Vintage is that a lot of people don't really play mass removal spells for creatures, so when you have a load of 2/2s and 1/1s on the board, just attacking in with them are hard to deal with, which is why the opponent concedes the game here at 7 life. Easy win, fun game. Going into game 2, I didn't see enough of the opponent's deck for me to bring in any cyber cards, so I decided to just ship it back. You find this a lot in Vintage, all of your cyber cards are so narrow and situational, and that your main deck is so powerful that you normally just don't need to bring in any cards. Yes, you could board and Dismember, but we have so many blockers for Vengevine, I don't think it's needed. To start off game 2, we're on the draw and I have to powder my opening hand, but then keep a risky 7 because I believe Black Lotus is powerful enough to make this hand strong enough, as well as Wasteland and Black Lotus can quickly fill up the graveyard so that we can delve out a Hogak. Okay, I'm clearly a luck sack. Now we drew Bazaar of Baghdad so we can play that and do a lot of degenerate stuff. Finding a Root Walla here is nice, so we can play Root Walla, but that gets Mental Misstep, so we're just going to play our Hollow One and say go. The reason why I played the Black Lotus is because of Tabernacle, but it didn't matter in the end because they had a Wasteland instead. I think that I'm pretty good at top decking cards as we find a Collector Roof off the top here, so what we can do is play Collector Roof and Deathrite Shaman and win the game. Now there was an argument to play Gaia's Cradle here, but if the opponent does have Tabernacle, I can use Deathrite Shaman to save the Hogak and then play Gaia's Cradle and save the Hogak even more. Going into the next round, in the first game, my internet went down, lost connection to Magical Line, and I couldn't connect back in time, so we lost. Going into the next round though, on the play, we have to mulligan down to 3. Yes, 3 before we can find a Bazaar, but we do find 2 Root Wallas and a Bazaar, so there is a good chance that we can do something explosive here. And when we activate the Bazaar, we actually find a Once Upon a Time, so what we can do is discard the 3 cards on the left, and Once Upon a Time in response to the Madness trigger, as we hadn't cast a spell yet. Now this finds us a Hollow One. We could have taken another Bazaar, but with no cards in hand, I don't think that's worth it. If they do have a Wasteland, then they've got us, and we gotta hope that these creatures can win us the game. Unfortunately, the opponent has a Force of Will, so we've just got to hope these two 1/1s can help us win the game. The opponent does a load of shenanigans on their turn 1, spinning a Sensei's Divining Top and presenting a lot of mana for next turn. Now we find a Root Walla off the top of the deck, so let's attack in and not activate the Bazaar because I want more draws for a Vengevine. To make our mulligan to 3 even worse, the opponent has Ancestral Recall and follows up with more cantrips and mana, but like an absolute beast, we rip Vengevine off the top to reward us for our patience, and we also find a Hollow One to cast for free to trigger this Vengevine. So let's discard the Root Walla, the Vengevine, and the Wasteland, cast the Hollow One, and bash in for a ton of damage. Now, I don't think Destiny was on our side here because the opponent actually wins the game through a combo with Yawgmoth's Will and also Monastery Mentor. They use Time Walk to take an extra turn, they Mystical Tutor for Paradoxical Outcome, recast everything, have a load of mana, cast Yawgmoth's Will, then cast Monastery Mentor, gets enough mana to Time Walk, and they eventually kill us. Going into game 2, we take out all the clunky 1-drops and bring in all the Artifact and Combo Disruption cards. Going into game 2, we have Collector Roof and Black Lotus in our opening hand. This is a very obvious keep, because not only do we have that, we have a Bazaar. While I do some vintage shenanigans, I just want to highlight that look at this board. I'm about to make my opponent concede because I have 2 Modern Horizons 2 cards on the table in vintage. I find it really funny how nowadays when Wizards prints a new Commander card, a new Modern Horizons card, it always has an insanely powerful impact on the vintage format because they're just so pushed. I'm not saying I don't like these cards, I just think that it's really funny. We end up finding a Force of Vigor, but I decide to discard it because Mindbreak Trap is way more powerful in this spot, and if they do have something like Tinker, what they're going to be tinkering for is the Sphinx, and that has protection from green. In classic vintage fashion, the opponent just continues to cantrip and eventually dies because they just don't manage to find an answer. Going into game 3, on the draw, we have a really tempting opening hand because we have both Force of Vigor and Collector Roof, but I just think it's a bit too weak for us to keep as we have no green source and triple Wasteland is not really good against the Artifact mana deck. But we are insanely rewarded on the mulligan to 6 because our opening hand is genuinely insane. I decide to bottom the Bloodghast here because don't forget Collector Roof almost instantly wins the game and we will have multiple draw steps to hit the oof. To make our hand even stronger, our opponent mulligans to 4 but has an Ancestral Recall turn 1. The opponent then follows up with a Mock Sapphire and ships back the turn. But now you're about to watch the best turn 1 in this video. Not only do we top deck Hollow One, we top deck Vengevine. This means that we can discard 2 Vengevines and a Root Walla, cast the Root Walla for the Madness trigger, and cast a free Hollow One to get those 2 Vengevines back. This is a brutal start for an opponent that mulliganed to 4. Now I decided not to cast the Bloodghast or the other Root Walla, and that's because I'm scared of Tabernacle, and Black Lotus on the table would at least save 3 of the creatures, and then we can Wasteland the Tabernacle if the opponent does have one. However, the opponent does not have a Tabernacle, they have a Monastery Mentor and start to cast a load of free and cheap spells to get a load of 1/1 tokens on the table. This could potentially be a problem. Now like a beast, again we rip Collector Roof off the top of the deck, meaning that we can now cast it and absolutely wipe all the artifacts on their side of the board, and also potentially win the game just because the opponent has Mana Crypt and that can kill them by bolting on the upkeep if they lose the coin flip. Now I start with a Bazaar activation. Like a beast, again we find another Vengevine. This means that we can discard 3 premium spells, cast a Root Walla for the Madness trigger, and then cast a Collector Roof to not only trigger the Vengevine in the graveyard, but to also force the opponent to activate the Sensei's Divining Top. The Collector Roof resolves, we play our Wasteland, attack in with everything, and the opponent has a Mystical Tutor to pump their whole board. They end up getting a Ponder from the Mystical Tutor, and I decide that I'm going to use this Wasteland post-combat on the Tundra just because I want to limit the amount of mana that they could possibly use because they only have 1 island at that point. Yes, we're weak to Tabernacle at that point, but I was thinking if the opponent has Monastery Mentor in their deck, do they really have a Tabernacle? I'm not too sure. Anyways, the opponent ponders and just concedes the game, so we now move on to the next round. Yet again, in the next round, game 1, for some reason the roadworks on my street messed with the internet and electricity in my house again, took down the internet, and I had to use dial-up on my phone, or hotspot on my phone, whatever you want to call it. The match ended up being super laggy, every click took like 5 seconds to register, but somehow I managed to win this game with a load of crappy 2/2s and 1/1s and whatever bashing into the opponent because they just couldn't remove the small creatures on the board. Pretty sweet win, F my internet. But now let's move on to the last round. Going into the final round, we have to do some Serum Powder shenanigans, mulligan shenanigans, but we end up finding a Bazaar as well as a Collector Roof, which is going to be very powerful, especially on the draw when we have information on what the opponent is playing. After some deliberation with the opening hand, I keep it like this, and the opponent leads off with an Urza Saga and Artifact, meaning that this Collector Roof is about to wreak havoc. We bazaar and find some clunky things to discard and use Black Lotus to dump to the board, and this actually just straight up wins the game. We crush the opponent from here. Going into boarding, we want all the artifact and combo hate to come in, and we just take out some clunky creatures. Don't click off the video yet, you're about to see the saddest game for the opponent that you're probably ever going to see in Vintage, because we're on the draw and we have a very good opening hand. Now the opponent leads with an Urza Saga, casts 2 artifacts, and says go. Well, we have a Force of Vigor and a Wasteland. Let's destroy this board. We Force of Vigor the 2 artifacts, untap, Wasteland the Urza Saga, we pass back the turn, they have nothing to play, and we bazaar into 3 Rualas and they concede the game. We ended up 4-1ing this league somehow. It sucks that my internet was so bad, but I'll open up these chests for you gambling degenerates, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and check out this video because YouTube thinks you'll like it.